discovery of nuclear fission and the creation today of the nuclear bomb, everything changes. Everything is different. From the beginning of time, man has had wars. Big wars, little wars, small wars between little groups and so on. And then great wars. In the last century, two major wars, which seen from one point of view is really one major war. Do you know, could you believe, have you thought about it, there are men today in many countries who are daily planning, preparing for and developing the weaponry for the Third World War. This is not fantasy. For these people, this is the truth. They see war as endless, inevitable, sooner or later, and they are already making preparation for their country being preeminent in the facilities to win such a war. It is a madness, of course, but many believe it. For the first time in history, humanity is really up against it. It has come through many terrible times and has never quite been defeated. But if we do not today find the way to peace, then there is no future for the world. Any small war today can become a major war. And if it were a major war, it would inevitably be a nuclear war. And if it was a nuclear war, it would destroy all life, human and subhuman, on planet Earth. We have, of course, the United Nations, which is, roughly speaking, against war, nuclear or otherwise, and who have a Security Council as one of its main parts. And that nuclear council has 5 countries who are the original 5 nuclear powers: America, Russia, Britain, France, and China. And if you asked the United Nations how many nuclear powers, they would say, well, today there were 5 before, and now there are 9 nuclear powers. In actuality, there are 24 nations which have nuclear weapons. And any war today using these nuclear weapons would destroy all life on Earth. All life. This world would become a toxic waste in the heavens for millions and millions of years. So the most important thing in the world today is to find the way to end war forever and ever. Very soon, humanity as a whole will be faced with this problem, this choice. Do we go on in the way we have gone on for thousands and thousands of years and destroy eventually all life on Earth? Or do we find the way to peace and ensure a future for our children and their children and on into the future? So what do you do in such a situation? What's the steps humanity has to take to find the way to peace rather than self-destruction? in a very volatile world, a world which is filled with problems, problems of relationship, a world which is so divided, so separated, divided into rich countries and deadly poor countries, terrifically poor countries, where the vast majority of the people live on less than $1 a day. If we ask United Nations what is the overall analysis of how people live, they will tell you maybe 5 million children die every year before they reach the age of 5 from malnutrition, lack of food, because their parents cannot give them food, because their parents are too poor to give them food. This is a reality. In a world which you have superpowers who are super rich and who do nothing about the true situation in the world. The true situation in the world is that 1/3 of the world, the developed third, the G7 or G8 nations of the world, usurp and waste 3/4 of the food of the world and 83% of all the other resources of the world. Which means that 3/4 of the world have to live on 17% at the most of the resources of the world. And so they die. They die in their millions. Every year, 2 to 3 million people die of starvation in Africa, parts of India, parts of South America, and so on. And we, in developed Europe, don't see this. Or if we see it, we turn away from it. We pretend it isn't happening. But I assure you, it is happening. And every statistic will prove to you that it is happening. So, the real danger to the world is the gap which is developing, instead of closing, is developing between the developed world and the developing nations of the world. That gap is getting wider and wider and wider. And in that gap are the seeds of a third world war, which would be nuclear and would destroy all life in the world. So it is obvious, is it not, what we have to do. We have to close that gap between the developed nations and the developing nations. It is really very, very simple. But how do we do it? And what is one of the major problems for the developed nations, like the European nations, the Americans, and others? Immigration. Ask any government in the world, what's the problem uppermost in the minds of your people? And they say, well, it's immigration of them. You know, there's people coming from the poor nations and they settle here and they take our houses, they take our jobs, and we have to suffer. And so we want a new government. We want a right-wing government who will come down hard on the immigration and so on. And that's what's happening around the world. In Germany and France and Britain and America, every developed country in the world is afraid of immigration. Immigration from the developing world. These people, the most active of them, see in America, in Japan, in Russia, in Europe, their dream. They listen to the television, or watch the television, listen to the radio, and they know how we live in the developed world. And they want to be able to live like that. They may want to be able to eat. They want to be able to send their children to school. They want them to grow up with an education that can stand and make a life for themselves. That's why there is a great swing to the right throughout all the developed nations. And when you vote for a conservative government, you vote to maintain the status quo in your own country. But you can't do that in this world. There is no status quo. So what have we got to do? Find a way to peace. A way which is not political, which is not to do with right-wing or left-wing, with socialism or capitalism or communism or fascism. It's not to do with isms at all. How can we find our way through this? Every kingdom in nature grows out of the kingdom below it. The first kingdom to be laid down was the mineral kingdom. From that grew the vegetable kingdom. From the vegetable kingdom grew the animal kingdom. And from the animal kingdom grew the human kingdom. We owe our physical bodies to the animal kingdom. But we're not animals, we're something else. We are human beings, which is a different kingdom to the animal kingdom, but retaining the bodies which evolved through the animal kingdom. And we, many of us, imagine that we are the top. We are as far as evolution goes. We have reached the top of evolution on planet Earth. We are the top rung of the ladder. This is not true. This is ignorance. Out of the human kingdom has been growing for thousands and thousands of years, is today growing, and will continue to grow another kingdom. It is called the spiritual kingdom, or the kingdom of souls. What are we? What is a human being? A human being is really a spiritual entity, a spark of the divine at its highest level. But that spark of the divine cannot easily, immediately manifest through this personality, this man or woman in a physical body with an astral emotional body and a mental body. It cannot easily manifest through, because the vibration of the cosmic spark is so high in relation to the vibration of the physical plane that it is impossible for it to do. And so the spark, the divine spark, creates an intermediary between itself and the man or woman on the physical plane, the personality. And that is the human soul. And the human soul is identical with the spark of the divine, is godlike, divine, perfect. And it acts as the divine intermediary between the highest level of man and the lowest level of man. And of course, when I say man, man or woman. And that is the reality of the human condition, which is not broadly known. Most people think, especially if they're religious, oh yes, I have a soul, and when I die, I will see my soul. It's not like that. You are the soul. It's not something you see when you die. You are the soul moment to moment to moment. A soul manifesting through your dense physical body, created by the soul. The soul incarnates over and over and over again and creates in each life, in the womb, a vehicle, a baby, with its characteristics, which it brings to fruition and enables it to work further for another incarnation. And it does this over and over and over again. Those who believe in reincarnation tend to assume that we, the personality, that's Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so in this life, incarnate again and again. It is not we who do it, it is our soul which does it. And it lends to its life, in every incarnation, more and more of its higher vibration. So really what we are doing is evolving. We are on an evolutionary journey, starting in the mineral kingdom and going on and on and on and up and up and up to what we don't know yet. But we know that some are already beyond us, that the spiritual kingdom has exponents who are not generally known in the world, because the spiritual kingdom as a kingdom is relatively unknown. So are the people who make it up. And the religions of the world keep some aspect of this phenomenon for the benefit of their adherents. It's not that this religion is correct, that religion is wrong, this religion has got more of the truth. It isn't like that quite. But that each of these religions bring the spiritual aspect of life to the minds of their adherents. It doesn't mean that they are more evolved. Sometimes there are members, higher members of the religious groups who are more evolved, but the religious groups are, relatively speaking, at the same level as everybody else. But their own makeup predisposes them to the religious field and not to other fields. We are all different, and we are meant to be different. It is a fact of life to be different. It is part of what we call our individuality that makes us unique beings. Each of us is entirely unique. There are not two souls which you can say are identical. If you can accept, with an open mind that is, that concept of the evolutionary journey, then I'm sure you can also accept the notion that there are those further ahead on that evolutionary journey than we are, than anyone you know is. And this is the case. On this planet, planet Earth, there is a large group of men who constitute the spiritual kingdom of this planet. They're made up of men and women who have gone through all the evolutionary processes that we go through. and who, by dint of their own struggle with themselves, have come to what they see as a modicum of light. From our point of view, they are perfect. From their point of view, it's only a relative perfection, because they see stretching ahead of them vistas of being and of knowledge that we can't even begin to imagine. They are the inspirers of men down the ages. They are known to each other and to their disciples as the masters of wisdom and the lords of compassion. And they represent the inner government of the world. And they work through their disciples, men and women in the everyday world. And they have done this for untold centuries. From time to time, manifesting themselves on the everyday world through a developed disciple. And so you get the appearance of the teachers of the world, people like Heracles, like Confucius, like Zoroaster, like Krishna, like Buddha, like Muhammad, the Christ. All of these are manifestations of one or other of the great teachers of the masters of wisdom. Now, around these various names have gathered religions of the world, but the teachers themselves gave teachings which are very much simpler than the religions which are filled with doctrine and dogma particular to the religion, and which in every case are man-made. Now, in 1945, at the end of the war from 39 to 45, the head and leader of that group of perfected men, as far as we are concerned, made an announcement. His name is Maitreya, and he manifested himself historically through his disciple, Jesus of Nazareth, for 3 years, from the baptism of Jesus to the crucifixion of Jesus. And round that manifestation has grown the Christian message and the Christian religion. 600 years earlier, the Buddha manifested himself by the same method, by overshadowing the mind and consciousness of his disciple, the Prince Gautama. And Gautama became Gautama Buddha. Jesus, of course, was absolutely aware and totally a part of this happening, and did it completely with his own free will. And likewise with the Buddha, the Prince Gautama, and before that all the various manifestations, always either Maitreya or the Buddha or another great teacher at their level manifested through a disciple. And that has been the way for thousands and thousands of years. Before he died, the Buddha, through the Prince Gautama, made a prophecy that at this time would come into the world a new teacher, a great teacher, a Buddha like himself, by name Maitreya, who by dint of his extraordinary spiritual stature would inspire and galvanize humanity into the creation of a brilliant, golden civilization based, as he put it, on righteousness and truth. In 1945, Maitreya announced his readiness with a group of his disciples, the Masters of Wisdom, to come into the world and to help humanity to enter this new time, this new civilization. Help us to build it. Maitreya said he would come when a measure of peace had been restored to the world, when the principle of sharing was at least beginning to govern economic affairs, and when right human relationships were beginning to manifest and prepare the way for a new world, a new civilization. Maitreya hoped they could come in about 5 years, around 1950. But it was not to be. The nations had not suffered equally, and they quickly went back to the old ways, the old greedy, selfish, competitive ways of the past, of Pisces. And so his coming was put back and put back and put back till eventually in July 1977, Maitreya said, "I am coming whether they are ready or not."